again. If you haven't seen my videos before, I'm Ross, and today I have a surprise. I acquired something else off of Auction Time, which, if you haven't been on there, it's addictive, so proceed with caution. But I'll take you over here and show you what I got. This, at first glance, is a 5100 splitter planter. I've been looking for something to plant 15-inch row soybeans to replace that Alice Chalmers planter that I have. And several years ago I bought the 6100 back here from a farmer that died. Bought it from his wife and his brother, and I was always going to try to find enough stuff to put a splitter on this. But the other day this 5100 came for sale and I couldn't pass it up for the deal that I got. So I said at first glance it looks like a 5100 series splitter planter, but after looking at it closer and talking to a few other Oliver Elite, we decided that it was a 6600 series frame with 5100 series units, because see, it has a box tubing tongue, and the 6600 planters were double frame planters, meaning that all your units on there were hanging on this back bar. And I'd even looked at a 6600 when they were new. I called and priced about it because I always thought I wanted one of those, because on the 6600 you could have units set up for 15-inch rows, and then if you wanted to plant corn, you locked up every other row and you didn't have to take any units off or anything. You just switch it over and plant corn with it. But it looks very similar to the factory setup with the 5100 with the splitter, but the difference is on the 6600 frame it's welded and you can't take the back bar off. That's how you know it has to be a 6600 frame, because they were double bar planters and about the only ones. And I think they were probably the only ones that used the box tongue instead of the tapered tongue like on the rest of the planters. But I got this home on Saturday. I guess that was yesterday. Depends on when you see this video. But anyway, I went early Saturday morning and pulled it home. It was about 15 to 20 miles, and the first 2/3 of it had to be down the highway, so I was kind of nervous about that, but I got it here without incident. And I've just been looking it over and different things that I'm going to change for next year before using it. I'm going to replumb it. It's got a kind of a mess of hydraulic hoses, not in very good shape. And the hose, he had it set up, whoever had it before me has plumbed it where one set of hoses was for the blower, and then he tied in the markers and the lift cylinders together so that everything worked with one lever. And I'm not sure that I'm going to keep it that way. I think there's times when I'd rather just be able to put the markers down without lowering the planter, or keep the markers up and lower the planter, so I might change that. But anyway, the blower, one of the hoses was bad and I couldn't even try it, so I got one made and tried it a while ago, and it works great. It's got a little leak down here on one of these fittings, so I'm gonna have to investigate what's going on there and change that. That's actually a filter, so I'm gonna replace that element and see what I can do to stop that leak. And like I said, I'll replumb it and get different hoses where it's not a whole bunch of extra hose hanging in the way, because that just causes problems, you know. I also noticed that the air gauge here is not working. The needle is long gone, so I'm gonna have to get one of those so I can get some idea of what the pressure is. If you've never used one of these, so you can dial in the air pressure for different crops. And pretty good planters. Really, the technology on these air planters hasn't changed too awful much from 5100 series till today. They've made a few improvements, but it's basically the exact same idea. What you have is a gentle stream of air that just pushes down in there, and it holds the seed into, if I can find one to show you, it holds the seed against this disc inside, and the disc has little holes in it to let the extra air out, and it just holds the seed in these pockets. And then as it comes around, there's a little set of brushes up here called tickler brushes, and they knock off any extra seed if it picks up more than one. And then as it goes around, there is a long continuous brush here called the cutoff brush, and then that shuts off the air where the seed isn't getting air anymore. And when it gets to the bottom, it falls down the tube and down into the ground. And they are very, very accurate with dropping seed at the same distance and everything, and that's what the advantage is over an air planter versus a old plate planter. Sometimes with the plate planters, depending on how your seed was shaped and different things, you wouldn't get a consistent drop, and you might have skips, or you might have two seeds at once or whatever. So this is a big improvement. I realized that I forgot to talk in the rest of the video that you're going to see about the fact that the 5100 was not Oliver White's first air planter. The first one was a 5400 Plant Air, and it was even available green, as you can see in the picture. Looked very similar to the 543 planters, except for the fact that on each individual row unit, it had a little electric motor that ran the blower for air pressure. And you can imagine that when you had 6 or 8, or even like with a toolbar planter, 12 rows, that could be quite a draw on the tractor's electrical system. So they did make a PTO alternator that you could run to try to take the load off of the tractor. I've never seen one of those PTO setups. I'd be curious to see one if anybody's got one. But I do know where there is a 5400 planter. It's a red one, a later one. The 5400 was invented by one of the Oliver engineers, whose name was Harry Deckler. And in the video you see up ahead, I talked a little bit about the story, so I won't repeat that just right now. But anyway, this piece of literature I found in my grandpa's house. So I would say that my dad picked it up probably at the farm machinery show, because he absolutely hated the John Deere planter that we had. It was a 494A. And it was getting, I know later in life when we were still using it, it sometimes would have a mind of its own, and it would skip and wouldn't plant places. So I know my dad was over it, and I would say he probably picked this up hoping that we'd get something like this. But Grandpa really liked his old 494A. So, and at one time in the county, that was like the king of planters. I think everybody had a 494A planter. So, but anyway, this is a neat piece of literature because it's still a green a green 5400, and it's even being pulled by it looks like a 1955 in the picture. And I showed this to somebody the other day, and I don't think it's like touched up in the art shop. I think it's actually a photograph they took. So you can see the Plant Air. I don't know how well you can see it, but you can just make out the little blower there kind of behind the box on the units, if you see that. And they were run by a little, like a fan motor like you'd have in your pickup, that ran the blower in there. So we'll look through this real quick and see what we've got. But talks about White introducing a revolutionary planter designed all by themselves, and it shows a little picture there of how it works, and shows the blower there on the back of the unit, and shows you how the seed is going through there and the air pressure holding it in the little pockets, and then when it gets to the bottom, it falls down the tube and out. This was also the first occasion of having a monitor on a planter. I'm pretty sure that they never made any plate planters with monitors. I might be wrong about that, but I do not think so. I think this is the first one that had a monitor. And we'll fold this out and see what we got in here. It shows you the different types of plates that you could get for different seeds. Tiny seeds like sorghum and sugar beets all the way up to beans and corn. Shows you the toolbar planter. Looks like you could have got up to 16 rows as a toolbar planter. You could space them 20 to 40 inches apart. There was really no way on these to mount them at 15-inch rows unless you made some kind of a splitter, which I have never seen done. But the units are not, they're a little bit wider, and the closest you can get them, I think, is 20 inches. I've kind of played around with that on the other ones, but that's all you're going to get. They'll start rubbing on each other and hanging up, and you won't be able to plant very good with it. The back of it just shows you some specs and the attachments you could get, fertilizer attachments and different type of stuff. 1/4 bushel seed hoppers, no-till cutters. That was a pretty new thing at the time of the Plant Air. I mean, there was a lot of 543s that had no-till cutters on them and things, but that was still kind of a new idea at the time. And you can see everything that's there. See your white dealer for Oliver and Minneapolis Moline Equipment. He has a lot to offer. I'll have to go back and look what year this came out, but anyway, it was invented by one of the engineers, and he had experimented. The story I always heard was he experimented first with vacuum, and he used his wife's vacuum cleaner and tried out some experiments in his house, I guess, and he came to realize that vacuum did not work as good, because when you create a vacuum, if you know anything about air pressure, it can actually cause condensation from the drop in the air pressure. So that's the last thing you want when you are dealing with seed that you want to fall, if everything starts getting sticky. So he switched to this positive air pressure, and he was onto something. And this was I know at the time when this came out, this was like the king, I mean, of planters. This was the great technology, 5100 series planters. And anyway, like I said, there's not really a whole lot that's changed on the design of the air meter, but they've made a few improvements. I think they made the air cutoff brush longer on some of them and different things, but basically it's unchanged technology, and it still does a great job. You can see on this planter that somebody made that the seed transmission is down here, where you can change your speeds by just moving to different sprockets. And that was really the big thing for me on why I didn't like that orange planter, is because if you wanted to change the seed rate, you had to spend about $1,000 and buy 12 sprockets and change each row individually. And then if you found out that wasn't the speed you wanted, then you had to spend another $1,000 or more to get another set of sprockets and try again. And with this setup, you just have one place to change the speed, and then it affects all of the units. On the true 6600 series planters, the seed transmission was not here under the tongue. It was over on the side of the planter, because like I said, all of the units were on the back bar. So the seed transmission was back in this area here. You can see pictures of that. And Chris Losey's got a 6600 planter, so you can watch his videos and you can see what I'm talking about. But anyway, that would be handy for changing the speeds with it out here right where you could get to it. But I think it's going to be fine just like it is. That's really not that hard to get to. And once you get it set, you'll be pretty well the same all season. So no big deal there. Somebody had to notch out the frame a little bit to let the chain through to run the back set of units. That's kind of a similar setup to the way the true 5100S planters were. They had the chain over here on the side and ran back, and it just runs this back shaft at the same speed as the front shaft, so you've got the same number of teeth on this gear as that gear, and then your units are all running the same speed, so when you change it one place, it affects everything. One thing that's nice about these planters, and they all have this, but they had these clean out tubes where you could let out your seed at the end of the season and clean out the hopper. And then they had this plug. This one's missing the little plunger on the end, but it's got a little flat plug, and you could stick it up in there, and then your seed level stayed at the bottom of the box, more or less, or bottom of the meter, and you didn't have a lot of wasted seed at the end of the year. So I think the first 5100 planters just had like a cap that went over the tube, but then you were wasting the length of this tube worth of seed every year. So by putting this on there with a plug on the end, you could shut off the tube so that it wasn't full of seed. I've got new ones of these coming. They're all kind of in rough shape, so that's one of the things that's going to be done to it. And then things like check all the springs. I see up there, there's a spring broke on the wheels here under there. So there's things to do on it. Things like bushings, I've got some of them coming. I want to go through each set of wheels and check out what's going on and put in bushings where it needs them. But I think I'm in pretty good shape with this. I'm happy with it. It was a good deal, and I think it will save a lot of frustration on my part next year, because that orange planter, it works great, but it's just, you can't really make good adjustments very easily. So anyway, but I guess the bottom line is I'm kind of biased. I want a white built planter and not a planter from another brand, so I guess that's probably the biggest reason. One of the things that changed from the 5100 series to the 6000 series units was the closing wheel setup. It was different. On a lot of them, you see it like this with a single wheel. You could get a double wheel setup, I believe, but they just used straight arms like this. And I'll take you back here and show you the 6000 series planter so you can see what the difference was. So on the 6000 series planters, it used this type of arm with the closing wheels, and what that gave you was the ability to do some adjustment. And then you have these closing wheels on the side, and you can get all kinds of things now to change out from this. If you want spike closing wheels, metal, plastic, different things to help bust up the wall of the seed trench and get good coverage. So that was one of the improvements that was made. But if you look at the, I don't know if we can see it, but if you look at the air meter, it's basically the same. There's not a whole lot different. Your gauge wheels setup is pretty well the same. So just little improvements that I'm sure people asked for when they were using the planter, and White got the feedback and took that and put it into production. So I bought the 6100 probably 2 or 3 years ago with the idea that I was going to put a splitter on and use it for soybeans. That's what the guy who owned it before me had done with it the entire time he had it. He planted 30-inch row soybeans with it. I actually bought it from his brother and wife because the guy who owned it had passed away. And it sat in the shed for maybe 2 or 3 years, and they didn't want to sell anything, And then finally, I saw it sit out beside the road in town one day, and so I went and talked to him and made a deal and bought it. Like I was saying earlier, there's really not a lot that's changed overall. This planter was originally sold in my county by our dealer. This is the dealer that took over after our dealer quit Oliver and White. part of the agreement was that they would keep handling Oliver and White because there were so many tractors that our co-op had sold. And they kept up that deal for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they finally just went to only Ford in New Holland, and they sold all the parts and things to another Oliver dealer down south. And so then we had to start looking elsewhere. And that's about the time that the dealer that I worked for at one time decided they were going to pick up some of that slack of the business for Olivers and Whites. And so they were an AGCO dealer, and they got access to all of the Oliver and White part books and able to get parts for that kind of stuff, because there was so many tractors around here that just was a good idea. So this planter originally was in this part of the county near me. Just a guy a couple miles north of me owned it, and then I don't know if he traded it or what he did, quit farming and sold it, but then it went to these guys that I bought it from, kind of on the, not quite the other end of the county, but now here it is back again. So the guys I bought it from did not use any of the liquid fertilizer squeeze pump. So I'm going to probably try to use this planter for 30-inch row corn next year, now that I have one that's just dedicated to soybeans. So I'm going to do some work on it too and hopefully try it out. If I decide to use the fertilizer, I'm going to have to do a lot of work because this is in pretty rough shape, but we'll see how far we get. This planter has the optional hydraulic pump that you could run off your PTO to run like your blower, but on the setups that I have, I think I'm going to just run them off of the tractor's Power Beyond. If you have an Oliver or White tractor, that's the way to go, I think. So I'll show you over on this other planter how that is. So on this planter, I'm going to try to run it on the Power Beyond, and on one of these large frame tractors like a 17, 18, 1955, or the Whites like a 285, 105, etc. It's really no big deal. You just got to tee into this line here, which is the pressure line from the pump. It goes to run your tees in here to run your 3-point hitch, and then it comes around and goes over to the remotes to send oil over there. So you need to tee into that for your pressure, and then for your return you go through this plug, and it's right into the reservoir again, so you can return your oil there. People make the mistake all the time thinking that that's the plug you tee into, and it is not. That is the plug that when you have the external lift hitch, the lines come out of that plug and tee off to each cylinder and off of your 3-point. So that is not the plug you use. You have to go down here. Some of the tractors I don't think had this hole, and you'd have to drill and tap a hole if you want to put it back in there. But that should work good. I'll put a valve on there to shut the oil flow off so I can shut the blower off. But anyway, that will fix the problem of having one remote tied up just with the blower, and that works pretty good, and then you don't need that PTO pump. Remember, if you like Oliver and White videos, please like and subscribe to this channel, and I'll try to keep making things that feature Oliver and White tractors and some more of the junk that I drag home. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.